At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 350 plus programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Shop the Sherwin-Williams July Summer Sale and get 30% off paints and stains July 18th through the 28th. With prices starting at $34.29, it's the perfect time to transform your space with color. Whether you're looking to revamp your interior or exterior, we have you covered with bold hues, soothing neutrals, and everything in between. Visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store or shop the sale online. Delivery available on qualifying orders. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today's NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. And back after a couple of weeks off is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. As if you paid attention for the last 2 weeks, I had 14 shows in 14 days with 14 opposing Cardinals opponent writers. And we are all the way up to episode 682, and this is our training camp preview as the Arizona Cardinals reported for camp on Tuesday and will have their first work on Wednesday, their first open practice to the public at State Farm Stadium on Thursday. Seth, we're actually at competition. I guess it's technically no longer off-season, and it's preseason kind of. We've hit the next stage.
Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously the big weight kind of thing was obviously Will Johnson, part of the second round rookie class that basically all signed the week of camp starting. And so now it's really just football, right? There's nothing outside as of, 4 p.m. on July 22nd. There's nothing outside of football to look at with the Cardinals, which is a nice, change of pace. It's basically a lot of put up or shut up for a lot of people and on the team and coaching and things of that nature. So it's exciting, man, because there's no distractions. It seems like things are coming together for a solid year.
Yeah. And now I do have a question because they had 8 players in for tryouts earlier in the week on Monday, and that included 3 long snappers, a quarterback, and 4 receivers. And that was after they had brought in 5 defensive linemen and signed one. So they're at their 91. Do you wonder if there's any injury that we haven't heard yet? Like, do you think there's going to be any surprise pup additions tomorrow? Because when I see 3 long snappers, I'm like, wait, is Aaron Brewer considering retiring? Is he maybe not 100%? And then you look at the 4 receivers, that could be anything. But then they added a defensive lineman, and they've got Justin Jones and Bilal Nichols coming back. Are they going to start are they going to start camp on pup? Those are all things that went through my mind yesterday. Did anything kind of raise any concerns for you with all those tryouts?
Yeah, I was interested in the long snapper and the wide receiver situation just because it was like so late. Well, and then obviously signing Keon Barnes late in the situation, right? Like what's kind of happening, but also it's training camp time, right? Like what happens if they're just, they look at Dalvin Tomlinson and Calais Campbell, they're like, we're not going to ask these guys. I mean, they're 70 combined. Like we're not going to ask them to do a whole lot, right? So I I go back and forth on those things. Like the wide receiver and the long snapper definitely caught my eye, especially long snapper, right? That was kind of odd, timing wise, right? Because that's something that you and I talked about literally the last 4 off seasons. Like, oh, will Aaron Brewer retire? And that's the conversation of long snapper, because if Aaron Brewer retires, they have to find one, and then we'll talk about him once he screws up, the first time, like Cameron Canaday back in the day.
Why we ended up with Aaron Brewer anyway. This is year 10, by the way, of
I know,
Aaron
right?
Brewer.
And so then he signs, and we go, okay, so he's back. But the other thing can be too, like, JG, he'd be like, we're not going to put Aaron Brewer out there. I'm not worried about Aaron Brewer in this situation. So we'll just, let's get a guy in here for camp and basically, kind of get ready for the season with Brewer and stuff. And so that'll be interesting to watch. But yeah, I mean, this was the late additions were interesting. But overall, I mean, there's nothing. We know that this time of year, the back of that roster is going to churn about 500 times. There's not going to be,
especially with guys that have a little bit of, who are going to miss a week, and so they need practice reps. They need guys to come in and to fill in the back end of the practice reps, so they're not overworking guys and getting them hurt.
Right. And I was kind of actually surprised when I was going through, doing kind of like depth chart looks and things of that nature, to see that, obviously the O-line and D-line, that's kind of the one where you just throw a lot of bodies out there. But they have a ton of wide receivers that are probably not going to be on the roster. And then they've got basically 2 tight ends and another tight end that's, unless he's just outrageously good, is going to be on the practice squad, right? So like they have some situations, but you look at like the running back room, right? Like I don't want to say we're confident we know what the 4-man is going to look like, but we're fairly confident, right? So
right.
It's kind of odd that it is just really 2 guys, right? One guy that we know what he can do, and they're just typically don't have a roster spot for him, and then the training camp preseason workhorse back, right? So like there are
damn night.
Yeah, right, exactly. So there are those situations when you look at it, because again, like back end of the roster depth at defensive line, you understand why they're rostering 13 right now, right? Like that's not a surprise. Same with offensive line. You look at it, 5 spots, and you're like, okay, I see why they have I think it's 17 guys on the roster right now. You're not surprised. But other spots you're like, they got to bring somebody else in, right? Like they're not just going to have 4 guys out there. Cause I mean, like, again, for running back, you and I are like, well, I mean, how much work is James Conner really going to get in camp, right? Like, so then it trickles down to the next guys and stuff like. So those are the interesting little nuances. So when it was like you said, when it was wide receiver, you're kind of like, they have a Tristan Jackson, which I don't even know who that is, right? Like they have those guys on the roster already. Like, why are they already, like, they've seen enough or haven't seen enough, I guess, that they're going to replace them?
Yeah, well, and I know that 2 of the receivers were also returners in college that could impact the return game. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Now, before we jump into what we're doing, what are some of the things that you're most wanting to see or looking forward to in camp this time around?
It's tough to kind of identify what you're looking forward to, because one, we've talked about it. Like one of the things that you and I talked about was the fact that this this organization as a whole has really basically neutered the fans getting any idea of what's happening in training camp, right? Like they have the red and white practice, woo, but outside of that, it's it's basically closed practices or like, hey, if you can make it out on a Thursday at 11 a.m., you can check out practice. And so it just makes it tough to what are you excited to see? Like, what are we excited to see? I mean, I think we're excited to see if the offense takes that next step. Ben Albright was talking about it on X today, and I think he was responding to Clancy. I can't remember his last name, but via Clancy's Corner, which is on
Alex
X.
Clancy.
Yeah, Alex Clancy. Thank you. And he was saying basically like the Cardinals defense needs to take a big step forward, and they've obviously signed people to do so. But the offense needs to take a half step forward. If that offense takes a half step and they go from, a top 12 offense to a top 8 offense, and they get that defense, from being a bottom 10, 12 defense like it was to just where the offense is, right? That 15 to 12 range. You're thinking you can flip 3 games right there. So I'm interested to see how those, what camp looks like in that sense of like, how is the offense clicking? Is it gelling? Because one of the big things we talked about all off season was like, I mean, there's not a new starter in here. And by the way, you and I aren't saying there needs to be a new starter. We're just saying like there's not a new starter outside of, unless you want to just call Isaiah Adams new, but like
last season starting.
And so it's like basically a rollover from last year. And so it's like, yeah, can they now take that next step? But again, like how much of that are we going to be able to witness and take a look at? And then obviously like the biggest thing pre-training camp or heading into training camp, like how do those older players look? That's always tough in training camp, right? Like again, I love Calais Campbell, but the reality is the reality. Like he's 38 years old, right? Like Dalvin Tomlinson, we're very, very excited about the signing. He's 31 years old. Like those are older, big guys. So like, do those guys have enough left? And again, it's hard to tell if we're going to be able to see anything from that in training camp, right? Because like, what do we see in training camp? What do they show in training camp? And then the whole thing that you and I always talk about, and this is just being Cardinals fans for so long, like, does the offense look good because the defense is so bad, or vice versa, right? Like
that's always the case. So like you don't know. Like we go back to the case of, remember Brandon Williams. Brandon Williams, he looked great because he was used to guarding Michael Floyd, and they ran the same play, so he looked good against Michael Floyd, and Michael Floyd was in a bad year to begin with. And then Brandon Williams looked terrible in actual games. But for me, it's not so much I'm excited to. One of the first things I always want to see is who comes out of that first, and like the first roster moves. Do they end up putting anybody on PUP? Like, is there anyone that's still not cleared? Like the guys to look at, BJ Ojolari, is he fully cleared, or is he going to start off on PUP? Is it going to be Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols? Are those guys going to start not practicing? Or are they going to be available from day one? Because then you kind of get and is there any surprise guy that ends up, we're not talking like JJ Watt tweaking his hammy on the conditioning test and then not practicing until they closed practices and camp was technically over, that was a Cliff Kingsbury, special on, we're going to hide everything. I'm interested in seeing who starts on like how the health is with the team. And then of course I'm like, well, I'm not looking forward to who gets hurt, but what I most want to see is get through camp healthy. I know they're not going to. They're gonna get hurt, and somebody's probably going to be lost for the season. It seems to happen every single year. But with that, let's talk about. We've got three main topics we're going to go through, starting with the position battles. That's the kind of the biggest thing. The position battles of note, players with something to prove, and potential player cuts or trades, guys that we think who could be on the move. We'll come back with that. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, best our Cardinals talk on the web, talking training camp for the Cardinals, the position battles of note. For you, Seth, what is the number one position battle that you're going to be watching?
I think first and foremost, it really is that right guard position. We talked about the offense, right? Like, barring an injury, we know basically how they're going to run out, 10 starters. We know what, we know when they're in that 12 personnel, what it's going to look like. The question is Isaiah Adams ready, and can he win and earn that right guard position? Because that's really the biggest question mark in terms of what they do out of what, is most their base set, with two tight, one back, and two wide receivers. That's my biggest question is or the number one, I would say, in terms of who wins that right guard spot. Is Isaiah Adams ready? Is there a late August Will Hernandez sighting / signing?
100% that's on the table. I think that's 100% on the table. I think Isaiah Adams is the plan, but
and Hernandez is the break glass in case of emergency.
Yes,
right?
Because and here's one of the big. They drafted a guy who wore 76 all through college, and Hayden Connor. He did not get number 76, and nobody on the team has 76. And so that tells to me the door has not been closed, because I know 100% if Hayden Connor could have had number 76, he would have taken it, because you don't wear a number all through college and then not take that generally the same number. Right. There. So that's just like the reading the tea leaves there. But that's not my most important position battle, because I'll be honest, I don't think that right guard is much of a position battle as it is as he's a player to watch. For me, the number one position battle, well, there's kind of four, but my number one is at cornerback, because I want to see how that rotation plays out. Can Will Johnson crack the top three, or will he get the Max Melton treatment last year, where last year they're clearly their number three, their three starters were Sean Murphy-Bunting, Star Thomas, and Garrett Williams. And Max played a lot. He played over 50% of the snaps last year. And so between Murph and Starling and Max, they all kind of rotated. And my question is, how is that going to shake out? Is Star going to be pushed to number 4, where he gets in, or is Will Johnson going to be good enough and Max Melton going to be good enough where they take pretty much all the snaps and Star is pushed into a reserve / special teams role? So I'm really interested, number one, to see how the playing time and how the position for that, because entering the year, that was a position we sort of felt was, well, not necessarily a strength. It wasn't a weakness. And now with Sean Murphy-Bunting out, even still, you felt decent about the three starters. Now you add Will Johnson in, who has this first-round talent. Where does he fit in? And so that's going to be, for me, it's going to be the most fascinating position, because I think it's going to be where there is actually the most real competition. While inside linebacker, I think, is intriguing, I just don't think it's going to be a big position battle. It's going to be more about who is the Mike and who's not. Because I don't think Cody Simon's going to, unless Cody Simon plays out of his mind, I don't think he's going to crack the lineup ahead of Mac Wilson or Akeem Davis-Gaither. And so the question is Wilson going to be the Mike and Gaither play off, or is it going to be ADG playing the mic and letting Mac have the role that he had last year where he played off the ball. He could rush off the edge, because if Mac Wilson's the mic, guess what? He's not going to be able to do that. So that's my secondary one. But for me, I don't think it's so much of a position battle, because I don't think it's a competition as to, I don't think it's a big battle as to who's going to be playing. It's just going to be where they're playing.
Yeah, and for me, that's again, and we didn't even talk about this, so it's hilarious that we've been able to do this. But I look at that same question on the offensive side. Like, is Zay Jones going to be that third receiver? Is it going to be Greg Dortch? Who's going to get the role mostly in the slot? Like, we saw more Michael Wilson in the slot later in the year, right? And
yes.
we've heard Marvin Harrison's going to get moved around more. So who is wide receiver 3 based on snaps, not necessarily like position, right? And so that's the question could a Xavier Weaver or Simi Fehoko, or hell, let's just throw Tawan Palmer like into the mix, and like, could one of them step up and grab the reins? Like, it feels like Harrison and Wilson are locked in as 1 and 2, right? But the question becomes, who's getting wide receiver 3 reps, and how do they go about that? That's why it's so interesting to me, because much like you were talking about, whether it was the linebacker position or the corner position, like, we know the names, we just don't know how the puzzle pieces are going to fit together. There's not outside of that right guard position, there's not really a question of who's going to be on the field. It's just going to be, what position are they playing and how often are they getting on the field, right? Like, those are the biggest questions we have. And we can say this with a straight face. I mean, it's been since 2016 since we've been, maybe 2021 that we've been able to say that about an Arizona Cardinals team. I'm trying to think back to like preseason 2021. Looking at it, like, you kind of felt comfortable with the line because you had Humphreys, Pugh, Hudson, and they had just brought in Beecham. And then on the defensive line, it was, the question marks were, as always, because Steve Keim was still in charge, defensive linemen and corners, right? Like, we had no idea what they were going to do at those positions. But yeah, like, that's what's crazy is it's just not something that we see very often. Like we said, like, every 5 or so years, you're like, oh, this roster on paper is talented. Now there's other questions that go with that, but it's not the normal Arizona Cardinals where we're like, all right, who's going to play right tackle and who's going to play right guard? Like that's fun to actually look at and just like kind of get an idea for once, because the questions aren't like who's the starter. The question is like, how is this rotation going to play out? Like who gets the snaps and who's going to win that, again, wide receiver 3 battle? Like, can Will Johnson can you imagine, Jess? Because again, we've lamented this for a decade almost. Can you imagine 3, and it'd technically be 5, but 3 draft picks starting at corner in the secondary? 3, like that hasn't.
That's crazy.
I know that hasn't happened.
And all 3 top 90 picks.
Right. Like we cannot stress this enough. That literally has not occurred for this franchise since they drafted Patrick Peterson. Because they drafted Patrick Peterson and they were like, hey, we don't need to draft a corner in the first 100 picks again. Like, why would we need to? And so like to see, like Jess said, like 3 top 100 corners on the field together for the Arizona Cardinals, you're like, holy crap, man. Like we haven't seen that in forever.
It's crazy. There are some minor. Well, you hit the receiver position, the rotation there. That's I'm watching. That's one of my big four. The other one is the defensive line for me.
I'm so intrigued how this plays out.
You have too many. They literally have too many for the defense that they play. They have legitimately 8 players. They have 8 players who should make the roster, and the max that they're going to keep is 7, and that's going heavy. And Dalvin Tomlinson, lock. Calais Campbell, lock. Darius Robinson, first round pick last year. Walter Nolan, first round pick this year, lock. The contracts say Justin Jones and Bilal Nichols are locks because they're fully guaranteed salaries this year. LJ Collier and Dante Stills. Those are the question. The 2 guys who were their best defensive linemen a year ago are now the most questionable to make the roster. And which is a bummer, like for Stills, because he's their best, he's their most productive young talent on there. But with Nolan and Robinson, you're going to pick them over Dante Stills every single time because they make him unnecessary if they're playing well.
Well, and it just becomes a old trope for Cardinals fans. It's something you and I talk about all the time, right? We get so ingrained with these good and I truly mean this, good rotational late round picks that we're like, can't lose that guy. Can't lose that guy. And a guy like Dante Stills, who you and I both love. I mean, I talked about Dante Stills in the 2023 NFL draft because I liked his upside. I knew he would never become a Darnell Dockett level player, but he had, some of that in him from a size and the way he played standpoint. But there's a lot of guys like that in the league, right? There's a lot of 30, 40% snap guys that you can get the same type of production from. And I don't mean that as a negative. Dante Stills was a hell of a draft pick. I mean, anytime you get that many snaps from a 6-round pick, that's a great pick. It is what it is. I mean, you can't fall in love with guys that are kind of, again, we love Dante Stills, but one of the worst defensive lines in the NFL, and he's been a big rotational part of that, right? So that's how you have to look at it. And so that, those are the things, like you said, I mean, they got to make decisions. And I mean, like you said, Stills is the most tradable asset on top of everything else because he's young. He doesn't cost anything.
He's been productive. So
right.
He is a tradable asset for sure.
Whereas Jones and Nichols, teams will just wait you out. Literally, they'll just be like, okay, keep them. I dare you. And so, and LJ Collier is the same way. And so that's the thing is you look at it investment wise, it's tough to see the 6 not being, like you said, Campbell, Tomlinson, Robinson, Nolan, Nichols, Jones. So it's if they do keep 7, who's the 7th?
Right.
And then if so, if you, for instance, if you don't get a 6-round pick back for Stills or even a 7th, or maybe you get a 5th because, like you said, he's been productive, and now team I was I don't have to worry about this guy. We drafted in the 6th round. I'll just give a 5th rounder for this guy. Would they be able to pass through the practice squad? I don't feel like Collier would have a lot of suitors, right? So
probably not.
That's how they look at it. Is they go we'll probably get Collier through to the practice squad more achievably than Stills. So let's put Collier on the practice squad, and then inevitably when somebody misses a couple weeks, right, they will have Collier still in the rotation. But it'll be interesting to see how they go about it. And you talked about the linebackers, right? I mean, Davis Gaither and Wilson Sr. are really interesting, but Cody Simon, man, I'm telling you, he is that.
He could be he could be a surprise, but I'm not betting on it this year.
No, and I'm not saying necessarily, but like we have seen those fourth round middle linebackers come in and just like because I've talked about this so much. Like understanding how to play linebacker is just so much innate as much as it is like a learned trait. And a guy like Simon is just innately talented of understanding those type of things. And so like when he inevitably becomes the starter, whether it's this year or down the road, it won't be a surprise. It'll be like, oh yeah, that's just he has that kind of juice in him where he gets things like he makes up for the lack of size, the lack of athleticism with just understanding how to play the position. He probably won't be a all pro. I would wager that pretty heavily. But he could be a guy that just, hangs around and plays well for a long time. And then the last thing for me with this roster is like, how do they fit the secondary as a whole? I mean, you mentioned the corner situation with Keitrell Clark and Starling Thomas, and then you add in a 5th round pick in Denzel Burke, right? But then you've got 3rd round pick Elijah Jones from last year.
Yeah.
You've got guys that they drafted this year in at safety in Keaton Crawford, right? You've got special teams ace that's been around this roster for a while, and Joey Blunt. Like this is again, it's just a puzzle, and it's fitting the pieces correctly. And yeah, it's kind of back into the roster stuff, but like I feel like we know the top 5 in Johnson, Thompson, Baker, Melton, Williams, and we know number 6 in Rabbit. Like we know number 6. It's those other guys, like
Yes.
and how they fit in specials. Does a guy like Starling Thomas continue to make the roster because of or Joey Blunt because of their special teams work over other, like those are the interesting ones to me.
And then for me, one final area is because for me, the offensive line, it has 6 set roster spots. It's their 5 starters plus Kelvin Beachum, but how they fill the back end is 100% up for grabs. You've got John Gaines. I think Nick Leverett is a guy to look at. They drafted Hayden Connor, Christian Jones, Josh Fryer, the undrafted tackle out of Ohio State. And I think linemen 6, 7, 8. I'm sorry, linemen 7, 8, and 9, maybe 10, are going to be highly contested. You know that they're going to have Beacham's their swing tackle. They're going to have a backup center, and they're going to have a guy that can play guard, and then maybe a 9th and a 10th guy, depending. And so for me, like that's deep in the weeds. That's these are hardcore Cardinals fans, and we cover the Cardinals on that. So the back of the end offensive line also is, for me, is very up for grabs right now, as opposed to other positions like a receiver. You're talking about who's going to be 3, 4. But you kind of know who 5 of the receivers are going to be. Tight end, who the top 3 are going to be. Is like who's going to be tight end 4, who's going to be inactive every week. You know who the 4 running backs are going to be. You know who the 2 quarterbacks are going to be. Pretty much. And then outside linebacker is going to be interesting simply because of what they added. How will the rotation? And I'm pretty sure that it will end up being, in terms of starters, it's going to be Josh Sweat and Zaven Collins. But how much will Collins end up playing on passing downs? And so, because you've got Baron Brown, you got Jordan Birch, you got BJ Jolari coming back, and so there's lots of things there. But yeah, then we're diving down deep into the weeds because that's what we do. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on level. Let's move up and let's talk about individual players. Who are the players with something to prove this year? That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web, talking about Arizona Cardinals training camp. It's our training camp preview. Next on what we've got is the players with something to prove. And Seth, like what you talked about right guard, I think he for me, I think he might be number 1, something to prove. in camp. Now, people could talk about Kyler Murray having something to prove this year. He doesn't have a darn thing to prove in training camp, so I'm not going to bring him up. Isaiah Adams, I think, is player number one to look at as who's got something to prove, because he's standing in the pole position right now as the starting right guard. When we saw 5 starts at the end of last year where they weren't particularly good, but they appear to have committed to him. And so I think he has to prove that he's worthy of that, because you've got, a journeyman in Royce Newman, whose literal playing time he was a starter as a rookie. He played less his second year, even less his third year, and then basically was the healthy scratch most of last year with the Buccaneers. But you could, like we talked about it, Will Hernandez could very be much in the picture. And then you got the John Gaines, you got Hayden Connor, you got Jake Curhan, you got Nick Leverett. So you got guys who could do it. So I think number one on the list for me, Isaiah Adams, has got something to prove to show that he can keep, not win, because he's holding it right now. He's in position, is to keep the starting job.
Yeah, and I mean he is the question mark. I mean, you can ask other questions, right? Like, how does Jonah Williams look coming off an injury that we have no idea what he injured, right? Like, I mean, we know it was a knee, but like what part of the knee? Stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, the question on the offense is going to inevitably come to, is Isaiah Adams the guy at the right guard spot? Again, like we were talking about with the corners, this team having multiple drafted starters, it's just not something that happens. I talked about that 2016 team. There was one drafted guy, like just one. So that's what ends up happening with those things. And so you look at it, that's the first one. My question is, and I don't think anything's going to happen. I really don't. But like, Jalen Thompson was not great last year. You and I have talked about this a little bit. He's kind of, I shouldn't say kind of, he's at the end of his contract. It's odd for players to go into the final year of a deal and there's like no conversation about anything, right? Like, we haven't heard, we're talking about a 27-year-old. It's not like we're talking about a 31-year-old type of, like, it's just kind of an odd situation. And so like, is it kind of a handshake, like, hey, this is your last year, we're going with Rabbit moving forward? Is he a bubble guy that we just don't know about? Because again, like, they're going to eat 10 they're going to eat like, yeah, it's over 10 million, but they saved 7.7 this year.
Yeah, he's got he has a very cuttable contract.
Right. And so like, it's such an odd, like, it's just not something you see very often, just in the NFL, right? Like, no conversation about, is this guy going to get re-signed? No conversation about, like you were mentioning earlier, like, he hasn't kind of popped up on the radar of like not showing up to things and not.
He didn't pull a Jawan Jennings,
right? And so like, this guy is just like riding out the end of this contract. Like, it's just, like I said, it's just not a normal. So I don't think he has anything to prove, so to speak. But I am curious, like, what's going on with the situation, and like, is it something to like keep an eye on, or is this, like, just basically they're like, hey, this is his last year, and then we're going with Rabbit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I look at number 2 on my list for who's got the most to prove, and that's Bicho Jolari, coming off the ACL last year, entering training camp. They were banking on him making a big league in year 2. After tearing the ACL, entering year 3, the Cardinals have acted like they are not counting on B.J. Ojulari, because they traded for Baron Browning and re-signed him. They signed Josh Sweat. They drafted Jordan Birch. Ojulari, he's got to prove something this year, or he's going to end up being one of those disappointing picks, like very much like the other passer, Cam Thomas and the Mike J. Sanders, who they flash and then they fizzle.
Right. And what's been rough with Ojulari is obviously they drafted him with
yes.
With the injury, and then he gets injured again. Like, those are always tough. But something you and I talk about all the time, injured players typically stay injured, right?
Stay injured, yeah.
And so he's an interesting one, because like you said, you cut him, and I don't think he's necessarily, I mean, it's tough, man. Like, you look at that, like, they re-signed Baron Browning. Obviously the big splash was Josh Sweat. The contract to Zaven Collins makes him a it's not even like a question. And so then from there, like you said, you got Xavier Thomas, and then you drafted Jordan Birch. So, like, do you go that deep in, like, where does he fall on the pecking order? Where is he at on the depth chart? Like, those are interesting questions, and why it would be way cooler if we could get into these practices and see a little more of this.
Yeah, for 100%. And I think, especially now, because of the number of drafted guys, I think Star Thomas is, like, as undrafted guys go, they're always something to prove guys. Even Dennis Gardeck in his time was here every year. He had something to prove. Star Thomas now, you've got Max Melton, you've got Garrett Williams, and they drafted Will Johnson. He's got something to prove. Whether that's does he deserve to be on the roster? Can he be traded? Can he keep his starting spot? Because basically, he's one guy Jonathan Gannon has liked immensely. He's an incredibly hard worker. He's gotten better. He struggled as a rookie, but started down the stretch. He got a lot of playing time last year. They trust him, but he's in a situation once again where he's got to prove himself. So I think there's a lot to prove. And then the other guys, obviously, for me, that have a lot to prove are the second year first round draft picks. Marvin Harrison has something to prove. I don't know if he has necessarily so much to prove in camp, but Darius Robinson as well, because we need to see them taking that next big step to become big time contributors in 2025.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, I mean, one of the guys that that fits that billing that you just mentioned is Tip Ryman, right? Like, a third round pick, was fine last year, but really, I mean, fine is not the way you want to describe a third round pick, right? Like, so what does he bring this year? Like, is he a guy that, you're like, oh, whatever happened to Elijah Higgins because Ryman starts to move forward, or is it?
Yeah, in fact, Ryman played more snaps than Higgins last year.
He did. Yeah, he did. 450, 41% of the snaps. Again, started 9 games, but that's just a matchup formation thing. But, like, they're in 2 tight ends all the time, right? Like, that is close to their base formation. And so, like, are they able to be a little more multiple and use Ryman, instead of a blocking tight end, whether it's as a run blocker or pass blocker? Are they able to use him in more ways this year? Or is it a situation where, again, it's okay, Ryman's on the field, he's going to block. Higgins on the field. He's going to get the ball, or, like, he's going to go out for a route. Like, that's what you kind of want from a third round pick, right? Is a guy that take that next step. And, especially with what Trey McBride did last year. Like,
yeah,
nobody was like, oh, why isn't Tip Ryman doing more? But you want to see him become kind of that more complete. And we're not saying that he has to have,
and if he is just Jeff Swain, that's great. The reason why they got him is because, one, he is like, he's going to be he's going to be a great blocking tight end, but he's got some upside where you could think maybe he could be more. And I guess we can see if that's going to happen.
Well, and that's what the hope is, right? Like you hope that you get more from a 3rd round pick than just Jeff Swain. But like you said, if he ends up being Jeff Swain, it's still a really good pick. Like if you get a guy that plays 50+% of the snaps, it's just unfortunate that it wasn't 70% of the snaps or whatever it is. Right. So.
Coming up next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web, we'll wrap things up talking about guys who could be surprise moves off the roster, trades, cuts. That's coming next on Rise of Sierra. We're back on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web. We won't know it right away, but let's put them some names on the radar for guys. And we've already kind of mentioned some who, when roster cuts come around at the end of August, you wouldn't be surprised to see them cut or traded. We already kind of addressed Dante Stills. He's their most tradable asset on the roster because they're so deep a defensive line. He's young, he's productive. And so, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him traded. I would be surprised to see him cut, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him traded. So he's like kind of my number one. Like I've got a number of guys that could be either surprise cuts or surprise trades. And by the way, all of y'all talking about Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones, I think either one of those would be a shocking cut because of the guaranteed money. Their contracts are fully guaranteed this year. And the Cardinals are, unless they are off, which, by the way, they were not unhappy with Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones. It was just disappointing because they had played the previous 3 years without missing a game. And that was one of the reasons why they felt strongly about signing them, because they were professional, they were solid, and they were durable. So I wouldn't put money on them getting cut, and they're going to be hard to trade. They will be.
Well, but again, for the same reason. Well, maybe not hard to trade in the cart for the team taking them on. I'd have to look at their contract, but it'd definitely be hard for the Cardinals to swallow trading them and paying them money and getting anything back in return. Like that's the hard part. Like that's what we're kind of talking about when like you talk about Dante Stills. Like, is Dante Stills better than Justin Jones or Bilal Nichols? I mean,
it's a no. Right.
It's debatable at best. Like, he equal at best, he's equal, and you owe more money to those other guys. Like, if there was a clear, like, oh man, Dante Stills, like if Dante Stills was the number one along the defensive line, you'd be like, oh, but he's literally like the third or fourth in the rotation. Like, so that's why and you go through this roster. Here's one for you. Obviously they just signed Jacoby Brissett to a decent contract. Somebody gets hurt in the offseason. Like, is Clayton Tune a tradable asset? Probably not, right?
I don't think he's shown like he has reached the status where he's going to get cut and maybe someone picks him up. And otherwise he'll be the practice squad guy, because the Cardinals only keep two. Like, this is something important to note. The signing of Jacoby Brissett said goodbye to Clayton Tune, but because since Jonathan Gannon took over, they only keep two quarterbacks on the roster. They only do. And so whether it was in 2023, you had Dobbs and Tune with Murray on IR, and then you had that I can't remember, Jack Driscoll on the practice squad. Last year, it was Desmond Ridder on the practice squad until he got signed by the Raiders. And this year, Tune's going to be in the practice squad unless they've decided. And when they brought in Carter Bradley for a look, I think they're actively looking to see what other options they have beyond Tune as number 3, because they feel good with their starter and they feel very good about their backup.
Let me throw a name out there, though, that we did kind of gloss over. Let's say Ryman takes the next step and Josiah Degura or Travis Vokalek, look like they can be that, third tight end, even though they do run some 3 tight end sets, probably more than most teams. Would you be willing to take something for Higgins? It'd be a day 3 pick, but would you be willing to take a 5th, 6th rounder for Higgins if a team like, ironically, the Miami Dolphins came calling back for him?
Here's the thing, yeah, because he was drafted by the Dolphins. No, Higgins, he was one of the guys I was going to bring up. I don't predict it, but here's a scenario. Josiah DeGuara, he is special teams guy. That's what he is. He plays a ton of special teams, so he could be a tight end 3. The 4th tight end on the Cardinals roster is not active. They've had 4 on the roster the last 2 years, and the 4th tight end is always inactive. But if Ryman takes a step forward in his pass catching, and Travis Vokalek shows more promise, and they feel they need DeGuara for special teams, I 100% could see Higgins being traded because they have players at that end. Yes, I could see that happen. I don't predict it'll happen.
No,
and so,
but
that's 100% a possibility for me.
I think we look at the wide receivers. I mean, I guess maybe Zay Jones if they like Xavier Weaver.
It could be a combination of Weaver and Fehoko could push Zay Jones off the roster.
Right, but nobody else really stands out that would be like, oh, that's surprising. What would be surprising? And there's a scenario, Greg Dortch. I could see a scenario where Greg Dortch could get cut. He wouldn't get traded. I could see a scenario where he gets cut. I know Kyler loves him. He is kind of a dog, but he does the returns. But look, he lost his spot as the primary slot receiver last year. And late in the season, it was Michael Wilson playing in the slot and Zay Jones playing outside. And, that could be the same thing. And then you get Xavier Weaver, who they like. Yeah. I could see a scenario, especially if you can get someone who can do, if they like another punt returner. Right.
If they have someone else that they think can be as good as Dortch as their punt returner, I could see Dortch as I'm not predicting, but there is a scenario for me where Greg Dortch doesn't make this team.
And we talked about the defensive line. There's really not much more to say. But what about a guy? We mentioned both these guys earlier. What about a Starling Thomas or a Keitrell Clark? Do you think either of them would have any value?
Clark, no. I don't think Clark will have any value really anywhere. Star Thomas, yes. I think Star Thomas might potentially have some because he's got now a year and a half of starting experience. He probably could. He's not going to get more than probably a 7th. But
right. Exactly.
An undrafted guy that they claimed off waivers, I could see that scenario so that you can keep Elijah Jones and Denzel Burke.
Right. And obviously, any of these guys we talk about, there's no real compensation return, right? Maybe you could. I know people would hate to hear this. We mentioned BJ Ojulari earlier. You might be a 5th, 6th round pick for Ojulari at this point because 2 knee injuries.
That's what they did with Cam Thomas and Myjai Sanders.
Right. And so that's people have to understand that's how the NFL works. You take flyers on guys like that, you don't actually pay anything for them. So again, you and I don't think it'll happen, but it's a scenario that could. And then as we mentioned, the one scenario or a guy, I guess, that could have a little maybe a 4th round pick value, and even that might be high, would be Jalen Thompson, right? Like,
Yeah.
again, 27-year-old, you owe him nothing. A team would not have to pay him, but he's, above average starter for most of his career. Had a semi down year last year, but like, he's a guy that you could, in a certain scenario, if Rabbit continues to grow, that you could be like, oh, this guy, like, but again, with how good the depth looks, would you really want to do that?
Right. It's like, you feel good about Rabbit playing defense. You like Blunt and Crawford for special teams. Do you feel good about Blunt being the guy that comes into play defensively? Maybe he could do that, but that leaves, like, when you have Buddha and JT and Rabbit, you feel like you have a trio of safeties where you're like, we got this.
Right. And
we got this. You
by
don't
the way,
really lose anything if Buddha's, like, yes, you're going to lose something. Buddha's out, but if it's Buddha and Rabbit, or if it's JT and Rabbit for a game,
right,
you still feel pretty good about that defensive backfield.
Right. And that's what I was going to say too. It's interesting, right? It's like, any of the combination of those three, two of them on the field you're comfortable with, but like, again, you take out Thompson and then you lose Buddha or Rabbit, now all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, like, really, Keaton Crawford or Joey Blunt with Rabbit, like, is that not a nightmare scenario there? So, like, again, he probably has the most value, but it would be just such a weird thing to do, because you're not saving any long-term cap. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, good, we have an extra $7.5 million this year. Okay.
I got a day 3 pick. Yay!
Yeah, right, exactly. No, in our luck, it'd be like, oh, it's a 6th rounder that goes to a 5th rounder, and then he gets hurt immediately. So it's just
jeez,
it's
don't
just
do that.
It's just a 6th rounder, and we're like, oh man, now we got to wait around all this time.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's. There's not much else to say yet. The camp practices will start later this week, so we will hold off on another show till next week, when we can actually talk about what we've seen so far. So we've previewed training camp. This is episode 682. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening as always. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be red, see red, and of course, Rise up, see red.